Okay, today I have the pleasure of introducing a running colleague of mine, real good guy. He's become a friend. I met him a long time ago. We hardly both remember each other back then, but through the years, we kind of reconnected on social media, and he's been in the community, in the running community, with the running store at Fleet Feet in Adams Morgan for over 35 years. Shawn Fenty is an avid cyclist first and then runner. And Shawn, I'm going to let you kind of explain how you got started with maybe cycling, and then how that transitioned into running, and then how the running store came about in Adams Morgan.
Well, great to be with you, Ben, and to reconnect with you in this way. My father was kind of a local running legend. He's run 53 marathons and several ultras, and it was his dream to start a running specialty store. And so he opened Fleet Feet in Adams Morgan in 1984, him and my mom. And through my involvement in the family business, helping do the build out, and then as the store grew and was successful working there, I became involved in the running community, even as personally I was more involved as a bike racer. But what we found was that people, were interested in learning about not only getting a running shoe, but they had problems, with their running. And so they were interested in getting solutions to those problems. And so, we'd see, kind of the common overuse injuries associated with running, and runners were looking for solutions for those. And there wasn't a lot of that information available at the time. So we, kind of on the fly developed a lot of those protocols for kind of creating those solutions for runners. And so that I very much enjoyed that. It sort of tapped into my background as a visual artist, being able to see shapes in terms of feet and shoes, and being able to match those up properly, being able to kind of see skeletal alignments and offer corrective advice for that. And I got a lot of, enjoyment out of helping people achieve their goals, whether it be in, my personal passion, which is the bike racing, or their personal passion, which may be running. As I got older, running kind of was incorporated more into my training regimen, from a cross-training perspective, kind of weight management into my 30s. And then in my 40s, I did triathlons for like 10 years. And so, running became part of my personal workout regime as well. And I learned a lot from that as well.
And now, do you participate now in master's level duathlete, or what? Tell me about that.
So I'm, 55 now. And so through my 40s, I raced duathlons and triathlons. When I turned back 50, I kind of turned my attention back to my bike racing, kind of primarily, sort of looking at the window of my competitive opportunity closing there, and realizing that was, my first love. I needed to kind of focus on it primarily. And so these days, it's really pretty much bike racing. A couple times a year, I might, jump out there and do Cherry Blossom or Army 10 Milers, one of my favorite local races. I like to do the Trot for Hunger, put on by So Others Might Eat. So there are a few run races that I, as touchstones that I enjoy doing out there in the community these days. Still lead the fun run from the store on Sunday mornings, which is a tradition that my father started when he opened the store. So we do 5 miles.
What year was that, Shawn? That roughly?
1984.
Okay.
Yeah. And so like, non-pandemic times, I still lead that group every Sunday morning at 9 a.m. We call that our Church of the Open Road.
So you're a franchise of Fleet Feet. Obviously, you've got your own individual brand of what you do. How would you say that, I'll give this a two-level question, how you're maybe more equipped than the standard running box store, obviously with your experience, but maybe tell us a little bit what separates you from maybe some of the ones that you might find at a mall that have more of a turnover. I know you're also involved with kind of recruiting your store sales and kind of fit people from local universities and that have a running background, but kind of give us that level of what you do, as opposed to some of the other box stores. And then also why in your view, because I have my own thoughts, but why in your view it's good to go to a running store as opposed to just get last year's Pegasus on Amazon.
Right. So, I would say that the core of what we do is based on matching products to feet. So, in essence, fit is what drives what we do. People tend to sort of overlook the necessity of having shoes that actually fit the shape of their feet. And so what we spend a tremendous amount of time doing is training our staff to see the shapes of feet and to understand the shapes of the products that the manufacturers are offering so that those two things can be properly matched. We do it through a static analysis. We look at our customers' weight bearing with their feet parallel and directly below their hips. And we note the skeletal alignment of all the weight-bearing bones kind of from the hips down, particularly at the subtalar joint, kind of where the weight-bearing bones in the lower leg meet the foot. And we look for a proper angle there. And if we see deviation from that, they're trained to assess which products will provide the necessary support to kind of correct for that, as well as which shoes will match the shape. So, I think people are typically kind of socialized to view their footwear as a fashion accessory, and they're sort of often distracted by the colors or marketing that may say, okay, well, if you get this shoe, you're going to run faster and jump higher. But it won't do you any good if that particular product doesn't match the shape of your foot or provide the necessary support for you. So we have 35 years of experience doing that. I recruit and train people who have a talent for seeing the shapes of shoes and feet. It is sort of a visual talent. Not everyone really picks it up. As well as people who have a passion for the sport of running and have a passion for helping people meet their goals, like wherever they may be. So it doesn't do my customers any good if sort of like my staff are elite runners, but don't have that empathy to view a person who's walking or running their first 5K or trying to do couch to 5K as less important than elite athletes.
Would you say that then your sort of foot shape determines more in terms of your selection of the running shoe, whether it be New Balance versus a Hoka, ahead of or kind of as more of a primary indicator versus watching them run dynamically?
Yes.
In your experience?
So yes. So foot shape starts everything. So like, immediately when people come in and have a seat and take off their shoes and roll up their pant legs and stand for us, that eliminates 80% of the shoe wall. So it really is sort of like you begin with the shape, because if the shape of the shoe doesn't match the shape of the foot, you're not going to have a comfortable fit. If you don't have a comfortable fit, there's nowhere to go from there.
In sort of the past decade, we, at least in the podiatry world, from what was, you know, spewed out from the manufacturers, would hear things like New Balance, and they came out with their concept stores having varying widths. They were one of the first to have, I guess, wider inventory. We were sort of originally kind of marketed that the Nikes tended to be more for the European foot. In 2020, where we are today, give us, and again, we're just talking broad generalities, what you see in terms of the goals of the major manufacturers, maybe the top four in terms of what you see.
Right. So I would start off with Brooks, which I think really kind of leads in the running specialty category of the athletic footwear business. They are committed to making shoes in different widths and different shapes and addressing all of the full spectrum of foot needs that are out there. So they make arguably the standout shoe in most every category, whether it be motion control or stability or neutral cushioning. They have great tempo shoes. They really kind of do it all.
Can you just sort of elaborate on tempo for those that don't understand what?
Yeah, at Fleet Feet, we call it kind of comp trainer. So some people will use it as a shoe that they might race in, and you know, it'll tend to be a lighter shoe that has a more responsive feel versus what might be considered an everyday trainer. It's sort of, you know, for running at that that fastest sort of sustainable pace that a person can do for 20 minutes or longer. And so sometimes people will like to have a second pair of shoes that they will use for those specific workouts or for racing, or just for days when your legs seem to have a little more bounce and you just kind of want to feel like you got something light and go fast on your feet, versus maybe when you're kind of slogging out miles or you're tired, or you might anticipate that you would get tired by the end of the run and you want something a little more protective on your feet. So that's what kind of what we mean when we call comp trainer or tempo shoe. Motion control is kind of the heavy duty shoe that is made to control a lot of excessive motion in a very flexible foot. And then stability and cushion are very kind of closely linked, but the stability shoe will have a little more reinforcement kind of on the inside, the arch side, what we call the medial side of the foot, to kind of control inward rotation, excessive inward rotation. The term that often gets kind of thrown around is pronation. What we have found in our work is that it's very difficult to kind of provide accurate, well understood written description of what is meant by pronation. And so a lot of times people kind of read that description and misinterpret it and kind of misdiagnose themselves. And so the term kind of gets kind of loaded. And so we tend to kind of stay away from it a little bit. And we tend to talk in terms of excess flexibility and good posture and proper alignment and deviation from optimal alignment. Those are terms that people can sort of wrap their head around a little bit better.
So you like what Brooks is doing in terms of development with the running industry. What are some of the other companies that you think are doing a good job, and what do they seem to highlight that you promote in your store?
So what we see in our store, you know, is that successful brands, you know, they develop their product line through consistency over time. So the product line really has to be high quality and effective at doing what it was designed to do over a period of time. Most of the shoes have a 12-month production cycle, and then they update the product. And so being able to update the product and be consistent to still serve the same customers is really what drives sales and drives success of a brand over time. And so that is the key to what has made Brooks #1. It is why New Balance has really come on in the last few years. They've really kind of done a great job developing key high volume shoes and then expanding that line and updating it consistently. And so I would say New Balance has really done a great job. As you noted, they were the first brand to really offer athletic footwear in widths, and they still really do, you know, a range of sizes that is unparalleled in the industry. So, you know, they'll make shoes, certain shoes out to 6 and 8E for widths, and down to 2A for men. Standard width for men is a D, narrow is a B, and New Balance will actually make some 2As in men's, which no other company does. Their commitment to fit and a broad spectrum of product range is impressive, and the way they have developed their product line, I would say over the last 5 to 7 years, has really put them, you know, in #2 spot, I would say, as a brand in our store.
Where does Nike fit into your store? And tell me a bit about the evolution of the Zoom Fly, right? And then some of the others in the industry. And I'm going to just show you one that you fit me with right here, which has been, I ran in this today with my daughter, and it, you know, I have very tight hamstrings, and I'm 55 like you, and I do like the aspect of this carbon plate in here, and the slight rocker that helped me in the morning, and just kind of feel a little bit more alive in the running shoes. So it's been I also still use my Adidas Boost. That's a little dog-eared and probably needs replacement, but I like to vary them a little bit. But getting back to you know, sort of the evolution with some of the Nike innovation, give me your thought process on that, and some of the ones that have kind of come in with their own brand or their own version of that, and then what your thoughts are with what Nike's doing in the industry, the running shoe industry.
So Nike, you know, in my 34 years, 35 years in this business, has always kind of led on the innovation front. They have always, you know, kind of produced products that were years ahead of other shoes from other manufacturers. They were the first to kind of come out with the natural motion shoe, the Nike Free. They were the first to do knit uppers on shoes and have totally like seamless uppers without kind of sewn overlays and those kind of things. They did that years ahead of other companies. While, you know, consistency that I talked about, that tends to drive sales numbers, isn't necessarily their strength. They have a couple core shoes like the Pegasus you mentioned, or the Structure, which have been around for 35, 25 years, that are sort of the core of their running line. But other product, you know, I would say perhaps suffers from, you know, less consistency, but Nike sort of like being willing to take more risks and drive innovation. Their 4% shoes are kind of the latest trend driver in that vein, where they recognize that ground phase could be improved, ground phase efficiency of the gait cycle could be improved by making a shoe that had a pronounced rocker sole, as you showed. Now, if you look at any running shoe, it will tend to be curved up at the front. But what happens is under load, it tends to flatten out. And so unless you somehow put some kind of a device to reinforce that curve structurally, under the load of push off, it will tend to flatten out. And so you will lose that kind of rocker effect. And so what Nike figured out to do was to put a carbon plate, or in some of their shoes, even just a resin plate, or a thick enough foam under the ball of the foot, and then taper it toward the toe so that that rocker was in effect maintained under load. And they claim that it improved ground phase efficiency by 4%, which at an elite level is tremendous. I mean, if you can get half a percentage point at the elite level, that's worth doing. And so a 4% improvement is a total game changer. I do think that that is sound technology, sound design. I think you're seeing it kind of across the board. I think it's part of what Hoka has always kind of incorporated into their footwear design. They have traditionally taken a little bit different approach by making their shoes with a really thick sole throughout. And so like that is what kind of, that thick foam tends to be what provides the structural integrity to keep that rocker in place underfoot. And then, you know, for their tempo shoe, which is a lighter, less bulky shoe than sort of the Bondi, which is what they're known for, the carbon plate comes into play with the Carbon X shoe. Hoka is our fastest growing brand. We see them as a brand which does a great job making shoes that are shaped like feet. That may seem to sort of be like an obvious thing, that shoes should be designed to be shaped like feet. But you'd be surprised at like how many concessions are made to an aesthetic whereby people think the shape of their feet is not attractive, and so the shoes are sort of like compromises are made in the shapes of shoes to attract the eye, even if they will compromise the comfort of the foot. So Hoka does a great job with their shapes. They do a great job of creating inherently stable product through the geometric shapes of their soles. They provide exceptional cushioning, I think industry-leading shock attenuation in their high cushion models, while maintaining a certain structural integrity. They're not too soft so as to destabilize the foot. And they're our fastest growing brand, particularly, I would say, with sort of, you know, people like you and I kind of in that middle-aged runner set. They improve ground phase efficiency, reduce impact, and, you know, keep old guys like you and me, you know, out there enjoying our runs.
Where do you think a brand like Ultra fits in? I know that, and I will also let you know that because I see so many misshapen feet, and Golden Harper's idea with his family when they developed that shoe was to match the foot and earth the ground, the old earth shoe concept. I have found great changes in each year. And getting back to your consistency, maybe it's because they're a relatively new company where, for instance, the back area on the shoe would crumple a little bit more quickly than you had to be really careful about getting that shoe on. But you had also mentioned some other things that were minor misses for you about Ultra, and maybe you could share a couple of those things, and it'll be interesting to see in 21 if they've improved upon that with their new line.
Yeah, are we okay?
Yep.
Yeah, so Ultra, if you look at an Ultra shoe, you know, the first thing I'll note is that they are shaped like, they do appear to be shaped like feet, meaning that they are longest in front of the big toe. And then they sort of taper down toward like the baby toe. And if you look at, you know, sort of the natural shape of the foot, it tends to be longest in front of the big toe and then sort of taper away from that. And you'd be surprised at how many shoes are longest in the middle. And again, I think that that's sort of a concession to an aesthetic where people are sort of used to their shoes sort of coming to a point in the middle. But if you look at the shape of your foot, it's really not shaped like that. So Altra was a brand that was developed kind of when the minimalist or natural motion running shoes were trending, were very trendy. And so their initial offerings were all kind of zero drop, and they had this sort of like shoes shaped like a foot kind of a design. What I found for them, in contrast to Hoka, you know, I was introduced to both brands at about the same time. It was about 10 years ago when I first came across both brands. And I was very impressed with the fit on the Hoka shoes from the beginning. And they have maintained that consistency over the last 10 years. Altra, I could see what they were trying to do, and I thought it was a good idea what they were trying to do, but it seemed to me that their shoes seemed to have a little bit too much of a curve to them. So if you turn a shoe over and look at it from the bottom, and you cut it in half lengthwise, what you want to pay attention to is like the shape of that line that cuts the shoe in half lengthwise. So some shoes that will be a straight line, and some shoes that will be a curved line. Now, if your foot tends to be straight and you put it into a shoe that tends to be curved, you'll find that your baby toes tend to be pressed up along the lateral side of that shoe, regardless of the width, and there'll be space next to your big toe, and your baby toe will be kind of pressed up against the shoe. And so in my experience with the Ultras, that seemed to be an issue with their fits. It seems that over the last 10 years, they have sort of changed some of their design concepts in the sense that they sort of started off with very low stack heights, very little cushion, zero drop. As people sort of experimented with shoes that had very little shock attenuation and zero drop, and maybe didn't find success, and that trend kind of petered out. You probably saw a lot of business in your field from people attempting to use shoes like that. They have changed to kind of a thicker soled shoes with more shock attenuation to remain viable, because people tend to be looking for that. There are more people sort of looking for that. I think they still do kind of a zero drop kind of a thing. Our experience, you know, in our fit process with shoes like that is it's very difficult to kind of predict who will be successful in low drop shoes. Low drop meaning anything kind of below 4 millimeters. A standard drop in a shoe meaning the difference between how thick the shoe is under the heel and how thick it is under the ball of the foot. The standard drop is 10 millimeters. A lot of shoes will do 8, some will do 4. But 10 is kind of standard, like a Nike shoe or like a standard kind of Brooks shoe, the Brooks Glycerin or something like that. And so like these kind of natural motion shoes these days, the most successful of them will kind of come in at a 4. I think Ultra still is kind of doing 0.
Yes, they are.
Now, and so like what we find is that when people transition, if if people are curious about that type of a shoe, there's an argument that people make that you know it's sort of more natural for us to have shoes that are flat instead of shoes that are elevated at the heel. Um, and so, like, there are certain people who feel like, they may get an advantage to having that. But when they make that transition from sort of a standard drop to that lower drop, it tends to increase dramatically the training load on the muscles and tendons in the lower back of the lower legs. And so, like, if you're used to running, 5 miles or 10 miles at a time, maybe you could run like 100 meters in a shoe like that, and work build up from there. So I think that a lot of times the mistake that people make when they're trying to transition into shoes like that is like they think, oh, well, I'll take it easy, I'll just run a mile or two, and it's much too far. So like I say, we haven't found like a sort of a way to sort of predict when people will be successful in products like that. So what we try to do is sort of guide people in terms of like, this would be the way to introduce it. This would be the way to kind of go from there. These would be the sort of the things to, look out for in terms of what you might feel in your body, to back off if you feel those things. So, yeah.
As a follow-up, have you found of the four major brands that you mentioned, obviously with podiatry, we make some general shoe recommendations. A lot of times we'll leave it to experts like you to fit the foot. I do happen, because I see a lot of runners and also just active sports people that have misshapen feet that need more room because they might have, claw toes or neuromas that might require even more room. And that is one fit that I see for ultra, although I do agree that there are some challenges with fit, and particularly with getting orthotics into an ultra because they don't have a lot of depth. Do most of the shoe companies of the several that you mentioned have at least one or two shoes in their line that will accommodate an orthotic or a drop-in sport insole, like the kind you might carry Superfeet or Soles or Forms, etc.?
Yes. So Brooks across the board, any of their shoes will have a removable liner that will accommodate or a custom orthotic or an over-the-counter one. And they will offer, in their core styles, they will offer both a wide and, in many cases, a double wide width. Hoka also does that. New Balance, as I mentioned, does that. We didn't mention Asics as a brand. I would put them in there still as one of the top brands, and they still offer that type of width sizing as well.
We've got our last 3 minutes, but what I think we're going to do is we're going to talk a little bit about running in general, maybe address a little bit barefoot running, cross training. I like to do it. I know Vin Lanana at Stanford was kind of the guy that pioneered that with his track team. Let's talk a little bit about things that you feel could extend running. And then what I think we'll do, if you're up for it, we'll take a 2-minute bathroom and reboot thing so that we can open up. We've got about 8 people here that might have a couple questions, and then also be able to expand a little bit more on some little tricks that you do with running and training to extend, or when you're fatigued, a couple things I learned from you on hills. So maybe start with kind of, what you like to do when you're getting like a fatigue point. And fatigue, as you and I both know, the fatigue points that they discovered, there's a study at Indiana University, that was my alma mater, that said at the max points of fatigue and form degradation, those coincide, make sense, with when you develop injuries. So you have a little trick you do, and maybe you can share that with us. We did it on our run.
Yeah, so like, one of the, there's a lot of psychology to it. So one of the things that I've tended to notice is that if you're running along on a flat and you're maintaining a certain pace, when you come to a hill, the natural inclination is to try to maintain the same pace going up the hill. You don't want to feel like that hill is defeating you. So you try to maintain that same pace going into the hill. But maintaining the same pace on a hill versus on a flat is going to mean an increase in your intensity level. And so like right from the bottom of the hill, you are kind of increasing your intensity. And then there's a lag between like when you increase intensity before that increase in intensity kind of hits your cardiovascular system. And so what you find is that you go into that hill running a 9-minute pace or whatever it may be, and then sort of like a quarter way up the hill, that effort kind of hits your system and you're like out of breath and you're redlining. And so, you have to back off and then you sort of feel defeated. What I find is that if you will kind of consciously take a moment and slow down at the bottom of the hill for the first minute or so, and then kind of increase your tempo over the top, that it tends to produce a better result.
Folks, we're going to take a 2-minute break here and then re-sign in with a new meeting. Okay, Shawn, you've got the floor again. We're going to get restarted, and you were finishing up talking about technique and approach on the hills with fatigue, and then give me sort of your rundown with how you've managed to keep longevity with the sport, and just you talked to me kind of offline about some of the principles of running that you like to emphasize.
So regardless of your age and where you are with running, our view on it is that there's sort of 3 pillars that sort of hold up successful running. The first is biomechanics, and that has to do with having the right shoe that fits your foot and provides the necessary support, so that your skeleton will be properly aligned and it will reduce stress of impact and the stress of motion. The second component is good form. And we tend to refer people to chi running as a very sort of accessible way of learning good running form. There's a good video that I refer people who come into the store on YouTube called Chi Running Simplified, CHI Running Simplified. It's just under 10 minutes long, and I suggest that people sort of review it and go out and run and then come back and review it and then apply those principles. So running efficiency, running economy is the second pillar of longevity. And then the third is progression. So wherever you may find yourself in terms of your training goals, to move forward, you have to do so at a reasonable pace. You have to add training load at a reasonable pace for yourself. And so managing, once we decide we want to be somewhere, once we decide we want to run that 5K or 10K, well, we want to do it yesterday, right? So we tend to put unreasonable demands on ourselves. So having a plan that creates a reasonable progression toward that goal tends to be the third key to success with longevity. And sort of, we tend to be our own worst coach in the sense that we tend to maybe push ourselves too far, whereas if we had like a professional coach, they would, often their job is to kind of hold us back from overtraining and pushing things too quickly. You mentioned core training. I like to see people do that, especially as we get a little bit older. Maintaining proper core strength is necessary for maintaining good form on the run. And you mentioned that when fatigue sets in, that tends to be the point at which form breaks down. And you know, when your form breaks down and you're fatigued, the likelihood of developing an overuse type of a problem is much higher. So sort of not going you know, like what I try to do is like not go further or faster than I can maintain good form and make the form kind of the focus.
So give me, and I'm just going to encapsulate and summarize for a couple people that joined in late. You mentioned biomechanics, you mentioned form, and then you mentioned the progression, the proper progression for training.
That's right.
As sort of the pillars of the three-legged stool, if you will. Maybe give me your top 2 or 3, and they could be either running errors or in terms of what you see running, and or shoe fit errors, other than the obvious going for just a glitzy, you know, techno shoe. It could be either of those. What are some of the biggest things that you see that maybe not everybody knows about, or that you think are really important to emphasize, you know, to the running community?
Right. So I would say foot strike placement is probably the biggest error that people make in terms of form. And what I mean by that is the tendency to land with their heel in front of their hip, especially going downhill, especially steep downhills. There's a natural tendency to kind of want to lean back and get your feet out in front of you on steep downhills to control speed. But that actually puts a tremendous amount of torque and stress into your legs to do it that way. And so if you reference that video that I mentioned, the Chi running, it gives an excellent description of what proper form is and what your foot strike should be.
And they talk about that too, sorry to interrupt, as the check mark that you see when you overextend with an over lengthy stride. Is that along the same lines as what you're saying?
That's correct, yes. And so I use as a little cue in my head when I'm running is like, I don't tie my shoes very tight. I think that, you know, a lot of times people tie their shoes very tight in an attempt to kind of keep their foot from sliding around in the shoe. If your foot is sliding forward in the shoe, it's an indication that you're landing with your heel in front of your hip. If you land properly, if your foot strike, if your foot doesn't make contact with the ground until your heel is behind your hip, your foot will slide to the back of the shoe. It will hold to the back of the shoe, even if it's not tied very tight. So I tend to use that as a cue for myself. If I feel my foot starting to slide forward into the shoe, I feel like my form is starting to break down, and that's a cue for me to kind of tighten up my form. As far as like a common mistake that people make in terms of buying their shoes, the most common is that they buy the wrong size, or they misunderstand, as I mentioned earlier, what pronation is. They may read a description of what pronation is and mischaracterize their own biomechanics, and then find shoes that meet the needs of that mischaracterization. So the most common thing that people do is they kind of look and they see that they tend to wear the outside corner of their heel on a shoe, and they think, oh, like I underpronate. And so then they start, you know, they buy shoes for underpronation, whereas that's just sort of a strike point. It doesn't indicate whether you pronate excessively or not. It really is not. It just means that you walk upright, basically. And so it's not an indication of what people often think it is. And so that's a common mistake that people make as well. They also tend to buy their shoes too tight. We have a saying that brains like tight shoes and feet like brooms. So there's a little bit of tension in that relationship. So people like their feet, their brain likes the idea that it knows where their feet are in space and that they're under control. But compressing the foot inside of a shoe and then doing a repetitive motion exercise like running on it causes a host of problematic damage to the foot over time.
Real quick, 3 stretches you love to do before a run. What would you say your top 3 are? And you showed me one of them that I liked a lot.
Right. So I tend to focus on the hips. What we find one of the most common discomforts that runners have, people in Washington, D.C., they run and then they sit, right? And so that combination tends to produce very tight hip flexors. And so I like this stretch that it's called a lunge stretch.
Are you able to demo it?
I don't know if I can demo it here.
Maybe a sagittal view, like a side view a little bit.
Yeah. Sorry. Okay. Let's see if I can get it.
At least we'll get the upper torso that we can see.
Right. So I'm going to kind of do it on a profile.
Yep.
Apologize for the lighting.
I love this
So
stretch,
on the
by the way.
profile,
It's a great stretch.
so my feet are separated. See if we can get.
That's good. That's a pretty good angle. Yep.
Okay. So, one foot is in front of the other. And then what I do is I sort of rock back and forth. And so when I rock back with my shoulders, I'm stretching the hip flexor here. When I lean forward, I'm stretching the hamstring on the opposite leg. And I tend to do it in an active dynamic kind of a motion, as opposed to like a static stretch where you're kind of holding it for a count of 6 or more. I tend to kind of rock back and forth. And what you'll find is that will increase the range of motion, and then I'll switch to kind of do the other side.
Do you do these before you go outside in the winter, Shawn, or do you just run a little bit to warm the body up and then do a couple stretches, or just whatever you feel like that day?
Optimally, I like to kind of warm up first. And so one of the things I like to do is kind of find a hill to walk up. And so maybe make the first 10 minutes or so an uphill walk, and then stop and stretch. And then I'll stretch that again afterwards. So, I mean, there's a lot of information out there about stretching these days. Active dynamic is considered better, particularly before running or exercise.
What's your favorite hamstring stretch? That's
so that same one is that same one. Yeah. So that same one will stretch your calves.
Yeah.
Your hip flexor.
All in one.
Yeah, it's all in one. Yeah.
All right. Well, I see, we're getting close to almost rounding an hour, and I do want you to be able to get on with the rest of your evening, but I'm going to take just 2 minutes. I'm going to open this up. If anybody has any, I'm going to try to unmute as many people as I can. Any chats or questions that they want to ask Shawn or me, happy to entertain it. And if not, any last thoughts that you have, Shawn, on anything else that you might want to share? I know you're big with vitamin D with what's happening now with COVID. Maybe you can tell us a little bit of that as I wait if anybody has any questions that they want to ask.
Yeah, thanks for that. So one of the things that I did learn in 2020 was the importance of vitamin D in the diet, and that most Americans, I think it's somewhere upwards of 60% of Americans, and particularly like 80+% of African Americans, people with melanated skin, tend to be deficient in vitamin D, and there are tremendous implications in terms of immune system function. Every cell in our body has a vitamin D receptor. So every cell in our body has a purpose for vitamin D. So if going into the next couple of months, which, are going to be very tough, I would highly recommend that anyone who gets this, hears this message, would get their vitamin D levels checked and optimize them. It has tremendous implications for particularly fighting respiratory viruses. which, you know, obviously is a big challenge for us right now.
That's great. And listen, I thank you for your time. I'm going to chat a couple minutes once we wrap the recording, but you've been very gracious with your time. Great information. I learned something tonight, and I look forward, Shawn, to our next run together. It's going to be fun. We'll be able to talk about some other stuff.
Great to be with you, Ben.
All right. Thank you very much.
All right.